Okay, guys, so I went ahead and did the diagram without demonstrating to you as a student since I am having issues with the software. I need to do a screen recording while recording myself. This is a really challenging item. If you had this argument and you did not get this 100% correct, maybe just had one or two things off, I would probably still give you full bonus points. If you have a really simple arguments with like just a conclusion and three premises and that's it, then you have to get it all right because yours is much easier. But if somebody had this argument and they're just off by one or two, instances, I would give them full bonus points. If they were off by three or four instances, then you would still get some points. So I have to keep in context, when I'm grading or giving bonus points, how challenging your, argument was. So that means the shorter and simpler your argument was, the mistakes are going to count off for more. The more complex, the more statements you have, the mistakes are going to count off for less because it's more likely that you have mistakes. So always keep that in mind. I do try to be, fair in that way. Look at this argument diagram. It's amazing. Just let me explain it real quick. So we had S3, a premise in support of a subconclusion. So that was giving a reason in support of one side of the debate and a conclusion that someone might reach about Chauvin being morally obligated to check the pulse of Floyd. And then here we had a reason about, police officers being trained to do something. Therefore, if a police officer's on duty, or doing something, he doesn't have a moral obligation to do as bystanders might command him to do. So that was a sub-conclusion en route to the conclusion that the opposing side might give. Now, this is not a final conclusion just because the sub-conclusion's here. Remember, two sides were being given, two arguments with at least one reason being given in support of a conclusion of one side. And then here it's just a complex argument that is offered with the premise in support of a conclusion, which is then used as a premise in support of the opposing conclusion that Chauvin was not morally obligated to check Floyd's pulse. An additional reason, or then some more reasoning, some more thinking was brought in terms of a premise. And I think that premise was about that one is using intellectual empathy, that is by seeing the opposing sides and the reasoning one could give for it. They were able to see how compelling both sides are, how good the logic is on both sides. And therefore, based on all of this, they were able to not reason itself, not even when they were using intellectual empathy, were able to decide which of these two opposing views to endorse, which all of this was being used in support of what? Statement one, the final conclusion. So pretty interesting. Can you see how much more complex arguments can be and actually are in everyday life? Compare this to when we first did diagrams, first did patterns, first did arguments, constructions. This is real life, you guys. It's much more messier. And in real life, people want to oversimplify a really complex issue, the complex issue of George Floyd, racism, systemic racism, institutional racism. Is it real? Is it not? The arguments are much more complex than people would let on both sides. Notice I didn't tell you I didn't take a definite position. I'm just talking about the reasoning in general and whatnot, police violence, whatever, do we back the blue? Do we not back the blue? Was all kinds of questions that arise. I'm thinking I wanted to say something else in here, but no, not necessarily. Now remember, you could have done a complex argument for George Floyd, and you might have even done the option where you choose that it's not rational for you to take a definite position, as in this argument. That doesn't mean that you made all of the steps that this particular argument has in it. Okay, remember, this is just an example demonstration. Just because you have the same final conclusion as this person does, or the same initial claim that this person does, doesn't mean that you have a complex argument. And even if you do have a complex argument, it doesn't mean that what follows is going to be exactly the same in terms of a pattern, how many statements you have, how many sub-conclusions you have, how many premises you have. Just because you have the same conclusion, much less final conclusion, doesn't mean your argument diagram would look just like this, doesn't mean that your final outcome would look just as it does here.